What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Making the Grade, our weekly look at the Arizona Cardinals PFF grades from the game that was, and a little discussion of what's going on with the Cardinals. This is an exciting week. It was a great win over the Rams. Just next level, right? Obviously the Rams had our number at home, for years. So beating them was huge, but also the way we beat them, 41-10. The offense was clicking. We'll talk about that. And the defense looked good, right? And I was just on with the Cardinalytics folks. Shout out to Corey, Shad, and Jake for having me on. Appreciate that. So we talked about some of these things, and now we're going to get into looking at the grades, looking at, how kind of what they showed in terms of the performances. And there's a lot to like. Some of the best grades I've seen in a while in a Cardinals game, and not surprising considering, how the game went, right? So let's go ahead and bring up. We're now real quick going to look at, these are the stats from just kind of the game stats, 41-10. Kyler Murray had 266 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 98.3 QBR, and 158.3 quarterback rating. That 158.3 is, most of you probably know, is the highest rating you can get. So, people have called it a perfect quarterback rating. But he maxed that out, right? And that QBR, the 98.3, that's on a scale of 100. So that is just really exceptional. We know James Conner had 122 yards and a touchdown. Kyler Murray ran for 59 yards. Mercado on 2 carries had 46 yards, had a nice 41-yard run. Trey Benson struggled, right? 10 yards and 11 carries. Tune lost 1 yard. That's really matter. It doesn't count. Marvin Harrison Jr., we saw the 4th reception, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns. Obviously, we know how great his game was. McBride had a solid game, 6 for 67. Wilson had a couple nice catches, right? Higgins had that great touch in the background. Dortch didn't do a lot in this game, but he didn't need to, right? But let's get into the actually real quick. And then on the defensive side, and the pass rush was obviously the big question concern. And it was nice to see Gardick had 3 sacks. Barnes got a sack in there. Zaven Collins got a sack. Didn't have it called back, right? He's had 5 sacks. Now, we know that the offensive line for the Rams was kind of banged up. So certainly that's a factor, right? So let's get right into it. Let's get in with the offensive grades. Not surprisingly, Kyler Murray just had, 96.9. That is just a remarkable grade. But also had some really nice grades. DeMarcado, 93.1. Marvin Harrison, 91.2. Trey McBride, 89.4, right? So, just seeing all that blue, yeah, as Drew says, seeing all that blue makes me think I'm watching Breaking Bad, not looking at Arizona grades, right? Real quick, let me say to some of the other folks that are in the chat. Brett Jones, thanks for being here. Great win for the Cards. Might be the most efficient by a Cards team since coming to the desert. Glad to watch this live tonight. Yeah, I think that word efficient is like the best word to describe this. And we'll talk about that with Kyler Murray, his efficiency. He didn't even have 300 yards, right? It was 266 yards, I think it was. Yeah, 266 and 3 touchdowns. Like raw stats, it was a good, but not, the raw stats, you don't look at that and say, oh, that's a quarterback's best game of their career, 266 and 3 touchdowns. It's good, right? But like efficiency-wise and what he did within the offense, this was the best game of his career, right? Chris Young, thanks for being here. Hey, good, great to see everyone. Yeah, Carlos, lamb chops are delicious, right? The Rams got cooked and the Cardinals feasted, right? So yeah, this was just an amazing game. In fact, I do want to take a minute and let's talk about Kyler Murray, right? Because we'll get into the rest of the grades. Let's bring up Kyler Murray here, right? K1, and we're going to start with this, and I'm gonna kind of get on my soapbox a little bit. I tweeted about this, that for those of us who've been defending Kyler Murray last year, where we were lacing up our shoes, and this year we're starting our victory laps. If you watch my content, I've been a Kyler Murray defender all along. Like when the short joke started, when the stuff, the rumblings about his attitude and maturity started. And listen, I'm sure he had room to mature. Every young player does. Like Larry Fitzgerald had to mature when he came to the league. But I thought those things were way overblown. I thought, I think people just kind of wanted to not like him. I don't know, the homework study clause or whatever, independent study clause. I think that was a Bidwell special and load of BS. that even got in there. All that stuff, and the people complaining about the contracts, and then the whole kind of tank for Caleb crowd. That right now, I mean, listen, I still think Caleb will be good, and I don't want to pile on the guy. I think he's taking a lot of heat, but like I think those folks who were thinking we should trade Kyler Murray to get Caleb because he's the next Mahomes are really like questioning that, right? So like, yeah, I'm taking a little bit of I'm kind of crowing a little bit here, right? Like I was a Kyler Murray defender, and I was talking about this on the podcast I just jumped on. Like I see tons of comments on my videos, and I see them in the chat, and I see them on Twitter. Like, and if you're watching this, like you maybe don't see all the video comments on my videos, but I see them, and I get tons of them, over the long haul. And I've seen people trash Kyler and say that I was wrong, and so maybe I'm kind of taking a little victory lap here, but like defending Kyler drew a lot of criticism and drew a lot of disagreements and a lot of people, and that's fine. That's part of doing something like this. And it's just really kind of satisfying to see Kyler Murray show what he can do, and the talent that I saw and knew was there the whole time in a system that's better for the NFL. And seeing a game like this, and I know it's just one game, but I think he's going to continue playing really well. He might have a few off games, but he played well down the stretch last year, and he's played well this year. And for all the people who weren't Kyler Murray believers and wanted to take the easy pot shots, sorry, not sorry, right? Kyler's back, and I think he's going to continue to ascend. So real quick, Austin, thanks for being here. Saying it seems like whenever DeMarcado touches the ball, he gets over 85. I could see him being a featured back after Connor leaves. Listen, everyone talks about Trey Benson, and Trey Benson has a higher ceiling in terms of his physical ability, but DeMarcado's just doing it right, and like Benson, his ball carrier vision, that was a critique of him coming in, and we've seen that be an issue with him in the league. DeMarcado is just a guy who does what they want. And he might, like, I thought about like today, like in some of my fantasy leagues, I have Connor, and then I have Benson. I have the handcuffed, kind of on my bench, and I'm going to be dropping Benson in some of those leagues because I'm thinking, you know what? If Connor goes down, I don't think Benson's the guy they're putting into the starting lineup. I think right now, DeMarcado would be the guy who would be the 1A back if Connor missed any time. And I think Benson would still keep his current role, and they're going to kind of keep working him. And, Steph Henn saying, Benson will be fine, still learning game speed. Yeah, and listen, I do think he's going to get there. The talent's too good, but he's not ready to kind of be a lead back right now, right? St. Drew saying, take the victory lap. It's well-deserved. Some of the same people who were bashing K1 are crying, wondering why they missed on Bryce Young, right? Yeah, 100%, right? And Grimdark, thanks for being here. Felt good to watch the Rams finally. Unfortunately, to torch the Rams finally. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop this season. I mean, that's part of being a Cardinals fan, right? So, absolutely. Brett Jones saying, overcoming adversity is a mainstay for Hall of Famers, right? And listen, yeah. So I don't want to get ahead of myself on Kyler Murray's career, but like he worked hard and he's fighting back. So let's get into what I wanted to talk about here, though. Here is grades through 2 games, right? First game, 75.6 is a solid grade, right? But now the 96.9 is amazing. But I want to talk about a couple of things, and I tweeted this. Like Kyler Murray's game, people have talked about this. A lot of people have said this is his best game as a pro, and I think it is his best game of his career so far. Dan Orlovsky, right, said, and I'm sure many of you have heard this quote, that Kyler's film in this game was top 5 player in the NFL film, not top 5 quarterback, top 5 player in the NFL type of film. Obviously, he's not saying he's a top 5 player right now in the league, but the film was that level, right? And the PFF grade 96.9, right? That's near perfect, right? 100 would be perfect, right? I don't know if it's 199.9, but anyway, right? It's a scale at 100. But anyway, the quarterback rating, QBR, like he just this game was so efficient. Like I said, 266 yards and 3 touchdowns as raw stats go are good, but not best of your career kind of game. But you have to look at the context, right? This offense is a run heavy offense, right? They had 231 yards rushing, right? 231 yards rushing. Okay. So they're going to run the ball a lot. So the passing yards are going to be suppressed. You're not going to see a lot of 400-yard passing games. And if you look at Kyler Murray's career, right, he's not a guy who's had 4,000 yards passing. Like for him, his best season's like 3,700 yards, I think, something like that, because he runs a lot and they run a lot, right? And you see that with like quarterbacks who can run really well. Sometimes their passing yardage isn't great, but a good season for them, an MVP type season like Lamar, for example, might be under, or be under 4,000 yards, but it's like lots of touchdowns, a lot of interceptions, a lot of running, right? So Kyler, the raw stats might not blow you away, but within the context of a run heavy offense and a passing game that's trying to be efficient, this passing game was deadly efficient this game. And it was like near perfect, the most efficient game of his career. So let's go beyond those grades. And I talked about this with the guys I was just hanging out with and the Cardinalytic folks. But like, okay, 96.9, that grade is near perfect. His QBR rating, all that's great. But let's look at a couple other things. And I tweeted about this. PFF has this thing right here, this BTT. It's truncated here, but like BTT is big time throw percent. This one here is big time throws. He had 6 of what they call big time throws. And his big time throw percent for the game was 27.3. Now I want to give some context to that. Okay. Big time throws is a stat, or is kind of something they record at PFF. And I think they define it as like those elite next level throws. I think on their website, they talk about the Eli Manning throw to Mario Manningham in the Super Bowl, where he, if you remember that one, that was just an amazing throw. These are those super rare throws that are just amazing, right? And just for context, right? Let's look at right here. This is, let's see. Yeah, this is this year. I want to get back to, okay, last year, big time throws, okay? I'm going to real quick just show you, just to kind of give a context. Looking at, we're going to bring it to let's see, we'll make it just regular season, 20% of snaps to just kind of get out, the outliers of the players who didn't play much, right? So we're going to scroll over here, looking at last year's season, okay, big time throw percent, Tyrod Taylor, and he had like 200 something dropbacks, so he wasn't a full-time starter, right? But when you get past him to the guys who were like more like full-time starters, last year 6%, right, was the top big time throw rate for the full season. So this gives you an idea of what that looks like. Now Kyler Murray, for his career, his best was 7.9, and that was 2021, and that was really, really good. Okay, big time throws. So the point I'm making here is those big time throws, the best quarterbacks make them about 5 or 6% of the time. Okay. So that gives you an idea of what kind of next level, crazy good. They don't give that stat out like candy. You get me? 5% of the time, the Mahomeses of the world are making big time throws about 5 or 6% of the time. More than a quarter of his throws this game were big time throws. Do you get that? Like, that's crazy efficient. And for the season, he's at 13.2%. Like that's and 0 turnover worthy throws. That's another thing, that he had 1 last game, 0 this game, right? So Drew's saying, would it be a fair summation that big time throws are a throw of 20 plus yards with low separation, completion, probability percents? I think PFF has a criteria that they look at and when they grade these, and I don't know what their criteria is, but I would imagine it is somewhere in that range, right? I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but that is something that's it's probably not far off from that, right? So that's a good way to look at it. So it's just crazy hard. Like the throw to Marvin Harrison Jr. in the back of the end zone was a big time throw, right? He put it where only Marvin can get it. And it was so pinpoint that Marvin had to make a great catch, dragging his toes to get it, right? Like that was like the margin of error was so narrow, right? So yeah, so that's the kind of thing. So like Kyler this was his best game of his career. The raw stats might not be the most, it's not the most touchdowns or yards he's thrown, but the overall efficiency, the lack of errors, like 4 incompletions, like the over a quarter big time throws, right? So is that like this is just a remarkably efficient game, like perfection, just about, right? Let me say to some of the folks who jumped in real quick. We got my buddy Kevin, looking good. Joe, cards are going all the way this year. Enjoy the ride. Here's hoping, right? So my buddy Kevin, thanks for dropping by. We got Celtics game. What is up, my friend? Appreciate you hanging out with us. What's up, everyone? Brett likes that data point. Yeah. It's one of my favorite ones to look at, right? I just really love that. Yeah. And I saw where you're going, like the Marvin Harrison, right? One of my favorite big time throws for him. Do you remember? I know it's a guy who is no longer here, but remember the sideline throw to Rondale Moore where Rondale Moore kind of was out of, like, he had to like dive out of bounds and kept his toes on the sideline, like that kind of stuff, right? What is up, Side Apple? Thanks for being here. Appreciate you hanging out with us, right? So yeah, I just want to say, so I wanted to look at this and just point out like that, like Kyler's this game is better than the raw stats show you. People talked about, and watching it, we saw it was something special. Some of the throws were amazing, but you also look at beyond the throws, look at the things he did to extend plays, right? You look at like he evading pressure like Kyler Murray does, right? Like there are plays where Kyler Murray made a big throw, but he first had to make big plays with his legs to get there, and most other quarterbacks would not still be upright. You know what I'm saying? Like there's only a couple quarterbacks that evade the pressure the way he does to get there, to have the chance to throw that throw to Marvin Harrison Jr. on the sideline, the one that everyone talks about. Like this is, and I've said this before about Kyler Murray. There's one or two other quarterbacks that you could argue have the rushing talent, in my opinion, despite what Orlovsky's ranking said, right? And even like you look at Lamar, he's a little more of a long strider. He's going to gain chunks of yards, no doubt, and he's big and powerful. He's a little bit of a different kind of runner. Kyler's more like Tariq Cohen, right? That kind of guy who's just like 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 a human with a joystick, you're just controlling, right? Kyler's very unique, but like there's only one or two other quarterbacks that run as well as he does, right? And then I think there's only maybe 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the league who, in terms of pure arm talent, have what he has: the depth, the strength, the accuracy. And I just think I think he has a better arm than Lamar. Lamar obviously is an MVP player and has a good arm, but I think Kyler has some things that he doesn't have in terms of arm talent, or at least at a different level. Mahomes, probably has better arm talent, or, I know some people say probably really, but, let's say Mahomes does, but Kyler's a better runner than Mahomes, right? Mahomes is decent, right? And I just think Kyler, the combination is so unique, and in the right situation with the right players and coaches around him, the sky's the limit, right? And the one last thing I want to say about Kyler, that scramble drill where he got out and then he threw it to Marvin Harrison on the sideline, where Marvin did a great job of faking out the defensive back. I'm sure you've seen the film. When I watched that reminded me of the kinds of stuff that we saw Russell Wilson do in his prime. It just felt like when you were watching Russell Wilson, there'd be so many plays where you thought they were going to get him for a sack, and he got out and he's running around, and then all of a sudden he chucks, and you're like, oh no, what's happening now? And Doug Baldwin is down there somewhere open in the middle of the field, and you thought you had him dead to rights on 3rd and 7 and scrambling, and you thought you're going to have him on the sack, and then all of a sudden he makes a play, and you're, as an opposing fan, like, you're like, oh my God, right? That play reminded me of those kinds of things. And I think Kyler, he's been doing stuff like that, but it's nice to be on this side of it. Let's just say that, right? Let me say hey to some of the folks and get some of the comments in here. Steph saying best part of Kyler's game was his reading of the defense and progression. So much faster than I've ever seen it. Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, thanks for being here. Daniel Corrier. This was a big win for the Cardinals, but let's not get carried away. The Rams are beaten up. Happy to see MHJ show up big, though. Listen, I'm going to enjoy it, and I think there's a lot of games left, so I think absolutely we had small sample size, but the context we have, like the Rams, they're banged up, but like, you beat them 41-10, right? This was a team that was banged up, and the Cardinals came in and, kind of totally destroyed them. In past seasons, when the Cardinals have played teams like this, they've been much closer games, and sometimes we've lost those games. They took care of what they need to do. So I still feel great about it. And then you look at week 1, being within 1 touchdown of Buffalo, having a chance to win, right? And being, having the ball at the end of the game, driving down there. And then, we were kind of disappointed coming out of the game. But then you see what Buffalo did to Miami the next week. Like, Buffalo looks like they might, their team coming in, you expect them to be a contender, and the Cardinals hung in there with them. Like that, there's reasons to be optimistic. Yes, we have to see it down the road, but like, I feel good about how they've been building this roster. So I have some optimism that they're on the right track, because like I talked about this again with the guys I was hanging out with before this. They raised the floor on this roster, like especially on the defense. Like the defense that last year was a lot of practice squad guys. This year, maybe it's some rookies and it's some guys that are not elite players, but they're NFL level players, right? On the defensive line, all the guys they brought in, right? And so like they've raised the floor so that the coaches have decent players to coach up, and they've done the right thing building through the draft. They've been careful and thoughtful through free agency. So I have optimism. Like I get it though. I get it that like from the Steve Keim era where they built with aging veterans, and all you needed was, a couple injuries to those old guys that you were really depending on. All of a sudden this roster fell apart. Well, the guys aren't, we're not relying on aging veterans anymore, right? For the most part, we're relying on young players and players who haven't missed a lot of time, and they've added depth. And, if one of those players got injured, I feel better about the depth behind them now. So I just feel like this is more sustainable. We'll see, right? David Penn, thanks for being here. We're very fortunate to have Kyler at quarter, 100%. I mean, he is so much fun to watch, right? Like the talent's there, but he's so much fun. So like, I have to remind myself that we get to watch an exciting and talented quarterback, right? When I was younger, I got to watch Jake Plummer, who was an exciting quarterback, but not as good. Later, we got to watch, Kurt Warner and, Carson Palmer, who were good, but not as exciting, right? So this is a really great time to be a Cardinals fan, I think, that we're going into. Drew saying, he agrees with Steph 100%. People got caught thinking Kyler couldn't read just because Cliff's rules and progression stuff. Yeah, right. That offense, whole different thing, right? Best O-line, best weapons. Kyler's had good OC. I think this can be special. Yeah, I agree. Thunder, thanks for being here. Rams weren't too banged up on defense. So yeah, right. Sure, you can say their offensive line, and that's why we got those 5 sacks, but their defense had, they couldn't stop us, right? So 100%. Drew McWhorter saying Chris Long said on podcast that if you could wave a wand and give us a top 10 D, we would be as dangerous as anyone in the league. He gave us a ton of praises for. I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jake Plummer's a mobile quarterback with Brett Favre's wrist. I agreed. Oh man. And then we got a question. Then we'll get to the grades. What do you think about Kyler's ability to make it through the whole season? That's the fair question, right? He's missed time in the past, but it's weird. Like, okay, people talk about his size and getting banged up. Like he does a good job of evading getting hit, right? The baseball slides, annoying. And when he's running, if you watch, you see him looking. His head's on a swivel. He is watching for where the guys are and has that awareness and knows when to slide, when knows to got to bounce. And he doesn't take a lot of hits. And like the time he missed last year, remember that was an ACL, and those are non-contact injuries, right? That happens, it's a freak injury, right? You're running and it happens to guys who run a lot and guys that don't run a lot, right? They just take a weird step and that's just going to happen, right? And aside from that, he's been banged up a little bit, but even that he missed maybe 3 or 4 games, not a full season. So what do I think? I think he can, maybe he has to miss a game or 2 if he gets banged up. I hope he doesn't. And I don't feel great about Clayton Tune, so that's certainly a concern. But I don't know. I think this offense is going to protect him more. They're going to run the ball more under center, more play action, less hero ball. I think they're going to be more measured about when he runs. In Cliff Kingsbury's offense, he had to run around more and make stuff happen when it wasn't working. I just think this offense is going to protect him a little more. So here's hoping, right? Drew saying our offense not being built around him carrying the ball full load in game should help reduce risk. Yeah. So here's hoping, right? All right. So we talked about Kyler Murray. This game was next level, right? in so many ways, right? The grade was remarkable. 96.9 is just really good. And like I said, the advanced sets. But let's look at some of the rest of the roster, okay? And we'll go by positions here. Actually, let's go with the offensive line. I always like to start with them. We'll sort by pass blocking. The offensive line had a solid game. The grades weren't as good as the previous game, but they were still solid, right? Paris Johnson Jr. 66.1. Pretty even the pass blocking and run blocking. That's solid, right? Evan Brown 72.9. And I want to talk about Evan Brown. I tweeted this out. Evan Brown has quietly been one of our best free agent signings this year. Like he was a guy came in a little bit under the radar, thought maybe, he's a center guard kind of a guy who plays both those positions, has experience starting. You're like, okay, he was a guy if you remember my rebuilding the Cardinals video from a couple of years ago, he was a guy I wanted to sign in that video, and they signed him the next offseason. So I liked him as a guy to bring in. And this left guard position last year with his, Wilkinson was just a turnstile. It was bad, right? And the other guys played. It was the one position of the offensive line that just wasn't good. And so far, he's solidified it. He's been, arguably, he's been. It's hard to say because who's where he ranks because Froholt's been good. Hernandez continues to be good. Paris Johnson Jr., but he's been solid. And I think that's a huge factor because, I've talked about this before. Offensive line is what they call weak link position, meaning the most important thing is how bad is your worst player. You'd rather have 5 decent players than 2 studs and 3 scrubs, right? And he took that one position that left guard that was the weakness and has stabilized it, right? So he had a solid grade. Beachum played well, right? And listen, I know when Jonah Williams got injured last week and Beachum came in and wasn't his best game, people were down on Beach. And I get it. Beach is older. People want to see someone younger and this, that, and the other. And I get that. But you could do worse for your swing tackle, your backup tackle. Your backup tackle that's stepping in is a veteran who has started at right tackle and left tackle a lot of games and has played well. He hasn't been elite, but he's been solid, right? So yeah, people were frustrated with him, but I feel good with him at your starting right tackle, right? He was a starting right tackle before. So he played solid. Now, Hernandez didn't have his best game, and same with Froholt in terms of the grades. And I know we got, how is Froholt when his pass run is better? Okay. This is a great question. I'm going to try to answer this as best I can. Okay. And boy, yeah. How do you have a 55 block grade when we have 250 yards, right? And all right. So this is probably going to be a long stream with the Kyler Murray conversation we had, and I'm going to go into this. But I went on this. Someone asked this stuff on Twitter, and I want to talk about this just a little bit. This is general PFF grade stuff. Okay. Just as foundation. Now, how PFF the formulas for their grades it's a proprietary thing, meaning they own it, they protect it, and they don't the recipe isn't out there for everyone because then other people would replicate it, right? And they if you don't know, part of their business is they sell their data to teams. The teams actually buy their data, and I'll tell you, these grades are more a public facing thing. The data that they're selling to teams is the deeper data. That's the stuff that the teams really care about. Okay. But within that, and I will say, I have to be careful what I say. I can say some things that are general knowledge, but I've mentioned this briefly before, but I don't talk about it a lot. I briefly for one season worked part-time doing a very low-level part of their process. You can apply to get a job working part-time, and they contract you out, and they pay. They have their whole grading process has multiple steps, and I won't go into detail because they're also proprietary. You sign a thing not to talk about the details of what they do, but they break it down to a lot of steps, and they have an army of hundreds of part-time people who just get paid, per game, a small amount. It's not a lot of money. You're really doing it just to be able to do that. And I did that for one season, and I was doing college games. So I wasn't even doing NFL games, and I wasn't doing the grading. I was doing a very low level process. So I don't want to make it sound like it's more than it was, but I did work part-time, and I saw a little bit of the behind the scenes and a little bit, and I don't know exactly how the grades are because what I saw, even the stuff I knew was a level, but I've talked to people, I've read stuff, I've seen the stuff they publish. So I probably know more about how they do the grades than the average fan, but there's people out there who definitely know a lot more. So here's some of the things I can't tell you, and this is stuff you can find out if you're out there. The way they do grades, let's start with this. This one, the grades are not based on stats right from the beginning. They don't look at how many yards. They don't look at anything. And I get that this question is exactly saying that. The way they do their grading is they look at every play and they look at the player and they say, okay, what did they do on that play? And they have a scale of -2 to +2. And it's like 0, plus 0.5, plus 1.5, or plus 1, plus 1, right? And they have these criteria for this kind of play. If this player does this kind of play for their position, if they pancake the guy, right, or in a dominant way, right, it's like a +2, right? Remember those big time throws? Those are a +2, right? Like 2 touchdowns by the same quarterback. Like 1 touchdown, if they just throw an easy short dump off to a running back, and the running back takes it 40 yards, that's not graded as highly as the throw to Marvin Harrison Jr. So sometimes the disconnect between stats and grades is the degree of difficulty or how well they did what they did, right? You can have an effective block where you stop the guy on one play where you hang with him and you keep him from getting to your guy, but you're not dominating him, but you get in his way and you do well enough, versus a different play where you pancake that guy into another universe, right? Those both were effective blocks and both might have been good enough for the running back to get free, but one of those is graded higher, right? The one that's more impressive. Okay. So you have to start by understanding that those grades look at it that way. So maybe the offensive line grades, and I'll tell you, a grade of 60, I'm just observing, and I know this because like a kneel down play, for example, if a player's only on the field for a kneel down and they don't do anything and they get 1 snap, you see that they usually have a grade of 60, right? So that seems to be the didn't do anything amazing, didn't do anything bad, middle of the road, right? Hitting just basic, right? Play. So like you might have a game like this where their grades a little lower. They just maybe they had fewer of the really good plays, or maybe they had more average but good enough plays, and then a few bad. And yeah, and Brett's saying listen, okay, I am a professor who works with data. All data is subjective. Okay. Like all data has some subjective, like, listen, balls and strikes, someone's making those calls for batting average, whatever. Like, and like even survey, like there's some subjectivity in all of it, right? But here's kind of the thing with the PFF grades. And y'all getting me on a tangent, and this may be a thing I've been wanting to talk about for a while because people hate on PFF grades. You and I are subjectively watching the game. And when we say, oh, that grade, I can't believe, how could they grade that he was so good? Like we are taking in our mind the memory of the really good plays and how we felt about the game and stuff. But we're forgetting the play maybe where he let a guy through and that's why Kyler had to scramble. It's because he missed his block, but Kyler saved his ass, right? Or maybe we're forgetting the plays where there was 0 yards on a gain, right? So I think when you look at that, you have to understand like everyone's doing subjectivity, but here's the deal. You and I watch the game and we're influenced by how we feel in the flow of the game, by the big plays that catch our attention and the little plays we don't see. And we're not watching every play. When they do their grading, yeah, it's still subjective, but they have a rubric, they have a criteria. They watch every play, they watch the player closely, and they look at that a lot more closely than they do. So there's some subjectivity, but they at least have a process and a way of, and they've defined, I'm telling you, they don't just say, oh, I think that's a 1.5. Like they get trained, and the guys who actually do the game, the guys who actually grade the games are the best of their, like the people who've been with PFF for a long time. Often the people who are doing the game grading are their full-time employees who've done it for a while. Some of them are former players. And I will tell you that every game gets double checked. So one person grades someone else comes back and checks their work. And so there's 2 eyes, right? Inter-rater reliability. In research, we call that inter-rater reliability. 2 raters make, right? So yes, there's subjectivity, but I'm just telling you, their process is so much more rigorous than you or I sitting back here like, That's bullshit. Sorry, I don't cuss on here a lot, but like that's so maybe I defend them a bit, but I also understand data is never perfect. So it's not perfect. There are limitations, but I trust their eyes more than my own, and I trust their process more than my own. Right now, let's get into yeah, exactly. 57. No, it's 57.84% that's made up. Right. Okay. So let's talk though the whole thing about the grade, right? Froholt, like what you'll notice 52.3, but then he's got a 67.5 pass blocking, but a 55.4 run blocking. Okay. There's a couple things I want to speak to that. It does the way they get to this overall offensive grade, they have a formula and it's not directly, it is not averaging their two grades. It's not a simple average. It's a formula that weighs things differently. And they come up with that formula. The way they come up with that formula has been, they've worked with teams. They've asked teams essentially they ask teams what things are really important for this position. Like for cornerback, obviously coverage is really important. So the coverage grade gets weighed a lot more than the pass rush grade or the run defense grade for a defensive back, right? So they ask they get feedback from teams and they create these formulas that weigh different aspects of what they do differently. So the run blocking grade is probably affecting the overall grade of an offensive lineman more than it is a wide receiver. It matters for wide receiver, but it probably is affecting the offensive lineman's grade more. So you start with that they weigh these things differently. It's not a simple average. They look at that. Now, there's other things in the formula that I don't know. So this is me speculating, but I suspect consistency and balance matter, because if you look at it, the Paris Johnson, his grade overall is higher than both of these two grades. You see that? His 66.1 overall is higher than the 65.2 pass blocking, 63.8. But I suspect that the formula is set up a way that this grade is higher because look, he wasn't bad in either, right? So his overall performance, because it was balanced, he was above average in run blocking, pass blocking, higher grade. You look at Will Hernandez though, right? His run blocking was good, but his pass blocking not as good. Or for Froholt, it was the opposite, right? In fact, Froholt, like you look at his overall grades lower than his run blocking grades. So someone who wants to just shit on PFF grades, like, well, that doesn't make sense. It's lower. So how's that make sense? Well, I think I think in the formula it says a guy who is below average at run blocking and there isn't as much balance, it brings his overall grade down. And I think this also goes into the season-long grades, because if you look at it, if a player consistently has grades, like let's say in the 66 range throughout the season, like if they have solid grades throughout the season, their overall grade is higher than that. And I think it's because of the consistency. So the point I'm making is this. These grades, they have a formula, and the formula takes a lot of things into account that we don't know, but it also is done with feedback from the teams. Now, can the observations miss something? Yes. Can the people watching not know some of the assignment stuff? Yes. But I still think that their observations are better than mine. Okay. It's not perfect, but I still think it's better than people give it credit for. Okay. Rant done. So I hope that was helpful. Calvin, thanks for being here. Interesting. Yeah, appreciate you jumping in. I'm glad it was interesting. But again, think about like Froholt, like the team did a good job, but probably had fewer pancake blocks and maybe had one or two mistakes, but still was good enough across the board. That's probably why this grade wasn't as good, right? But remember the days of what Billy Price and Elijah, like when we had these really bad grades. If our worst grade on our offensive line is 52.3, right? That's still not bad. So offensive line, solid. Okay. It wasn't the grades weren't as high as they were last week, but this is solid, right? Brent saying you make a good point, another good point. Fans see point as fans see emotion flow in game. Watch replay of the game last weekend. The fan base is livid, rightfully so. But overall, they are blaming wrong folks for loss. Yeah, and like we feel the game, right? The people who are grading this stuff are sitting back and they're just boom watching it, right? All right, so Offensive line, though, overall, listen, we talked last week, it was a solid game, and it's another solid game, right? I mean, remember last year we're seeing red and dark orange grades, and we're seeing 2 weeks in solid game, solid grades, right? So I feel like the offensive line they've done a really good job kind of building it up, right? It's to a solid line. All right, getting to some of the other positions. Tight end. McBride, the raw stats, 67 yards, 6 catches, 67 yards. What wasn't, an amazing stat line, but it was efficient, right? This is the theme. It was efficient. And I talked about this in my reaction video, and I've said this before, in the Discord and other places, that McBride I don't think he's going to put up like a 1,200 yard season. Like, I think people who are looking for the McBride to have a crazy breakout season, I just think with Marvin Harrison Jr. and the fact that it's going to be a run-heavy offense, I think the stat line might look similar, 800 something yards, maybe a little bit more. But I think it's going to be, it's going to be more efficient, and the wins are going to be there, right? And I've given this analogy before in the past. It's like if you have a basketball player who's a good player on a bad team, and he scores 27 points a game because there's no one else good. And then all of a sudden, either he goes to another team with good players, or they bring in good players, and that 27 points a game goes down to 23 points a game. But they're winning more games because he doesn't have to carry it all, right? I'm not saying his stats are going to go down, but with this offense having other players, I think it's going to be a little bit like that sort of dynamic where he's going to be really good and efficient, but he might not put up the crazy numbers some people are hoping with, right? But his grade was so good, and that catch on the sideline, was so good. So, he was solid, right? So it was really nice to see such an efficient grade. Elijah Higgins had a nice game. He's turning into a nice piece for us, right? A guy who they picked up off of waivers that Miami had drafted, like I think in the 6th round, right? So he had a nice game. Tip Ryman didn't have a great overall game, but yeah, as Brett says, his 70.7 pass blocking grade, right? We'll need him against Hutchinson. Yeah, Hutchinson, right? Aiden Hutchinson. But again, coming out of college, that was the thing. He was a good blocking tight end, and if he can do that consistently, he's not going to be a major part of the passing offense anytime soon. But if he can do that, that's what they brought him in for. And then every once in a while, he might contribute. So that's really overall, really good game from the tight ends, right? McBride was efficient, got his. Higgins had that nice catch in the touchdown, right? So this was a solid game. David saying, I'm glad the Cardinals have a good run game. I don't remember last time I could say that about them, right? Yeah. Tip also playing well on special teams. Yeah, 100%. So tight ends did a good job. Looking at the receivers, obviously, let's see if we can maybe do this to get the receivers up here to the top. Kind of. Still doesn't quite do that. Okay. We'll just do position. Okay. Dortch, he didn't have a ton of targets. His grade was just okay. Pascal, only limited. These guys were in at the end, really, when we had it not out of, kind of in hand. So, not a great grade for Dortch. He was, he didn't do a lot this game, but we love Dortch. Harrison, though, right? 91.2. I think that was the best grade for any wide receiver this week, if I'm not mistaken, but crazy good, right? So again, much like Kyler Murray, this was not just a stats thing. Like, those degree of difficulty, that catch in the back of the end zone, the dive, like the plays, what he did to get open on the scramble play where he juked and fooled that defensive back. Like Marvin Harrison Jr. was on, like really the way we would hope to see. So that was awesome. Michael Wilson, solid, right? He had a couple of nice plays. So, overall blocked well is also, which is a thing we need him to do, right? So solid game from him as a complimentary piece, right? So Marvin Harrison was awesome. Michael Wilson was solid. Trey McBride as a pass catcher was really, really good. Dortch isn't always going to be the torch, right? No, not to worry about Dortch. We know what he can do, right? Exactly. Like the Michael Wilson catches. So overall, good job. Looking at Clayton Tune, not good, right? We're worried. And, listen, that's the one position we talk about. Can Kyler stay healthy? I sure hope so, because Tune wasn't good last year, and it's limited snaps, but, you worry about that backup quarterback position, you wonder if Tyler did miss time. I mean, Ritter would probably be on the roster, and I don't know who would be starting. Ritter wasn't great in the preseason, but he's at least played as a starter in the NFL. He's been better as a starter in the NFL than Tune has. So let's just say it. So yeah, in the past, but looking at halfbacks, right? So DeMarcado on seven total snaps was really good. He was really good as a run, or in the running game. Yeah, running, right? The 90. I mean, we saw that run he had, right? In terms of that 40-something yard run, right? He also was good here on the pass blocking, which we knew DeMarcado was good at that, right? In terms of the passing, receiving game, not as much, but had a really good game on limited snaps. James Conner had a solid game, right? He didn't grade particularly well last week, but he graded pretty well this week, right? 73.7. Benson, we talked about him before, right? It's the ball carrier vision isn't our issue, right? And so, again, the talent's there. I think he's, going to develop, but the vision isn't good. And if Connor went down with an injury, hope he doesn't, but if he missed time, I actually really think it's DeMarcado that would be the lead back for now. In terms of he's just been more effective, right? So yeah. Real quick, Kevin's asking, how can players just out of college like Harrison be so dominant so quickly against NFL defenders? Yeah, well, I mean, Harrison, a lot of people saw him as the best wide receiver prospect to come out in a long time, since like Jamar Chase, right? So sometimes guys are just that elite and they come out and they're ready, right? So they're just that next level, right? So yeah, they're just that good, some of them. And there are some players in the right situation who really helps with that too. Brett saying, we never really saw Ritter with the ones. Yeah, like, listen, Ritter is not a guy who you want as a starting quarterback on your team, right? Atlanta, we saw that with Atlanta. He's not that. But he did start games and didn't look as bad as Tune looked in his one start last year. So even though we didn't see him with the ones in the preseason, if Kyler had to miss a game or two, if you ask me, I'd probably actually feel better about Ritter at this point, even though Tune looked better in the preseason. But I don't feel great about the backup quarterback position. So, all right, so that's the offense. I mean, when they put up 41 points, like, we're not used to seeing this much blue, right? And I know, that Drew mentioned that earlier, right? We're just not used to seeing that. That was so nice, right? And only one red was Tune, right? But everyone else, like, yeah, decent, or not, not horrible, right? Up to really good. Looking at the defense, right? The defense had a solid game, and the grades there also were pretty good. Like, we look at the bottom end, there's a few guys that were low, but we don't have any dark reds down there, which is nice. So let's look at this. Gardeck had just an amazing game, 91.9 up at the top, 92 pass rush grade, right? Buddha was really good. Clark on limited snaps. And I tweeted about this, and I know some of you commented on this, like a weird anomaly. And someone, I think Blake Murphy actually mentioned, well, when he played a lot at the end, that might explain it when they were running the ball to end the game. But like, all of his snaps were run defense snaps. He had no coverage snaps, so no coverage grade, which is interesting for cornerback. But let's go ahead and kind of get it by position. Actually, let's see. Let's bring up coverage snaps so we can get the secondary kind of hopefully here first. Of course, then there's the guys at the bottom who only had a few snaps. No, sorry. We'll go by position. All right. So let's start. We're going to jump around here a little bit, but let's look at the safeties, right? We got Rabbit, didn't really, I don't think he even played last game, right? I think didn't have any snaps off, at least defensively last game. And so this game, he played 8 snaps, had a solid grade, right? 65.9. He also was all run snaps. So, again, it was at the end, right? So I don't want to read too much of that, right? Jalen Thompson didn't have a great game grade wise, right? So he was good in tackling. Coverage is where he had struggled a little bit. Now here's again, I know you'll say, well, you have to remember, yes, they didn't have a ton of yards, but a coverage grade, they look at every play. So if he didn't do a good job, even if the ball wasn't thrown there, but he, a player wasn't, like, maybe they blew coverage, or they didn't do as great, or they got beat a little bit, or they weren't, that still goes into that. So just because he wasn't targeted or his man wasn't targeted doesn't mean, that sometimes some of those low graded plays happen on stuff like that. So Jalen, he did a good job tackling, run defense pretty solid. It was the coverage grade that really hurt him, right? And they didn't have a ton of, they didn't do a whole lot on offense, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. We'll go down here. Let's get down to the other safeties real quick. Joy Blount, 8 plays, 62, right? That was non-factor at the end. Free safety in here. Why? There we go. There, Buddha. I'm sorry. He was right there. Buddha had a solid game, right? 78.5 grade, 90.6 run defense. Look, that run defense grade was crazy good. His tackling grade, was a little bit lower. His coverage grade was okay. I know there's one play that he kind of blew the coverage, but that run defense grade, right? He was a beast. So Buddha just had a great game, right? So really likes what you saw there. Getting to the cornerbacks, right? Slot cornerback, Keitrell Clark, we talked about him. Good grade on limited plays, right? And then we have Garrett Williams, the starting slot, had a really nice game, right? The tackling grade wasn't great, right? But solid defensive grades on run defense, solid coverage grade, right? And this, remember the point I made about how different positions, they weigh those things differently. Tackling matters, but like the coverage grade was good enough that it kept that grade up, right? And so even though the tackling grade wasn't great, it didn't bring it down a lot, right? So Garrett Williams continues to be solid, right? At slot. And then we have Starling Thomas had a really good game. I don't know if this is his best game as a pro, but it might. But like 75.9 and 75.9 coverage grade. Like, I know we all want to see, Max Melton in there, who also played well. But Starling Thomas is solid, right? And even if he's not your long-term starter, if that's your guy who's your first backup, and he has these kind of snaps and solid, like that's solid depth. But right now he played really well. Murphy Bunting, didn't grade as well, didn't have a great game grade wise, but he's the number one cornerback. So you also have to, you have to take into account he's getting targeted more, or he's the number one receiver covering. So that matters, right? The degree of difficulty doesn't get baked into the grade in terms of the player covering, but this is why this is a piece of context we have to think about is, okay, Murphy Bunting grade isn't great, but he's also as a number one quarterback typically drawing the best, the toughest matchup. So his grades, we have to consider that. With Buda Baker, degree of difficulty with all they ask him to do is also part of that, right? That doesn't make the grades unreliable, just means a thing we have to think about with those data, right? So it wasn't, again, with the way the defense performed, it was good enough, right? They didn't get torched totally, right? And then Max Melton, you love seeing, he didn't really play much last week, right? Max Melton last week had 11 snaps with a 54.7 grade, so it wasn't a great game, but it was his first game, rookie, right? In his second game, though, you see his snaps doubling. That's a good sign, right? You want to see him getting more snaps, right? So the fact that he's got more snaps and played well is a really positive sign. So really like what we're seeing there. Let's see, we've got a couple of comments about this. Brett saying Clark might be your guy at nickel in pass downs where the teammates still run. Don't like Garrett Williams tackle rate, plus he's been invisible on TV. Well, yeah, of course, with your corners, you don't want to hear about them on TV. But I like Garrett Williams. I've wondered, why he wasn't playing outside, but I think he's been solid at nickel. But maybe Clark is kind of more in the running down because Clark does seem to be a better tackler, right? But I think Garrett Williams does some nice things. So I think Williams is a guy who I think is going to continue to be a starter. But but you like overall how that room played. And then Drew saying Williams and Murphy both look good in separation versus completion percent analytics. There you go. So that's another piece of it, right? Yeah. And Drew saying looked at Melton's jump in tackling. He earned it wrap up after one missed big hit, attempt week 1, coachable, fast learner. Yeah, nice to see that, right? So the coverage units overall were solid, right? None of the grades were terrible, right? Again, Murphy Bunting lower, a little bit lower grade, but it wasn't horrible. Jalen Thompson wasn't great, but obviously they still only held them to 10 points, right? So now looking at, see if maybe let's get into, Okay, we're going to look at the linebackers next. Mac Wilson didn't have as good a game. Last week, he had a great game, right? His grade last week was 87.9, right? So he had a little bit of a downgrade. His coverage was good. The tackling wasn't as good. The pass rush wasn't good last week. But 57.1, I'm not going to worry about that, right? Especially, again, how the overall results were. Look at the other, Owen Papo, Kaiser White. Okay, Kaiser White had a rough game last week. And I know he's coming back from injury, like 27.8, really rough. So it wasn't a great game for him grade-wise, but it was better than last week. So I'm going to give him some slack that maybe he's recovering from that injury and stuff, or kind of getting the rust off. But I want to talk about actually, let me real quick hit the other guys and then come back to Papo. Chris Barnes, decent game. Not, coverage was a little bit down, but it was fine, right? But Papo, I want to take a minute to talk about Owen Papo because, this was a 5th round pick, had the 4.39 speed. Like, he was a combine beast, right? And, coming out, the book on him was crazy good athleticism, but the linebacker instincts were a concern. There's that franchise guy. If you follow him on his YouTube stuff, just some good work. And, I remember seeing his kind of analysis of Papo is like just watching the tape coming out of college, that the slow reaction and the linebacker instincts were concerned for him, like worse than anyone else he saw that draft year. So I was like, I'll say, like, in terms of Papo, I was like, man, I hope he ends up being really good. He has the athleticism, but they're going to have to coach him up. And I was a little worried about those instincts, right? But I'll tell you what, like, you look at like last year, 65.3 grade, like as a rookie, right? 114 snaps. So he wasn't a full-time starter, but like, that's a really good grade for a 5th round pick. I mean, that's a good grade for a linebacker in general, right? And like, that's solid. And he was a rookie, right, who got that. Now, his first week 1 grade was lower, so his overall grade now is lower. But like, the point I'm making is Papo has been a pleasant surprise for me because of just coming in, the impression I had of his kind of linebacker instincts being maybe not as good, right? He seems to have taken to the coaching. They've coached him up, whatever is going on. He's become a solid part of the rotation. Now he's fewer snaps, 16, so they're still working limited, right? Compared to Kaiser White, for example, or even less than Chris Barnes. But, if he continues to play well and they continue to develop him, like, this might be a guy we've drafted who becomes a starter for us in year 3, right? And becomes one of those key players. So you like to see that, right? So that was solid. Real quick, let me get a couple comments. Stefan saying D-backs did well against Stafford with the grades could be split by first half, second half. That's another way to put it. Yep. Rob Orr, thanks for jumping in here. Good evening, gents. Kyle played understanding 20 times this game versus last game. Definitely a difference when compared both games. I know you were tracking that, so thanks for sharing that. So we've got those guys. Now let's look at let's see if is that or these are the pass rush snaps, aren't those? Okay, I'm thinking out loud in real time. All right, we're starting about pass rush, which will let us get to the defensive line and edge rushers a little bit more. All right, so let's get to the defensive line and the edge rushers. We'll kind of talk about those together. Justin Jones, guy they brought in, didn't have a great grade game last week grade-wise. A little bit better this week, I think. Let's see. Last week at 43.3, 61.9. So that's a solid game, right? 61.9. We'll come back to the edges. We'll start through these defensive line. Collier, 56 is not a great grade, but it's not horrible. Last week he was 39, so it's improvement. Bilal Nichols had a nice game, right? 71.4. That was a good grade for him, right? And better than last week. All these defensive linemen struggled last week, and the Bills were able to run the ball pretty effectively, right? This week, much better. Roy Lopez didn't have as good of a grade, but we love Roy Lopez. 60.4 is still decent. Let's see. Chris Tonga, not great grade, but on 15 snaps, a little bit below average there. So, the defensive line didn't grades. They weren't stellar, but they were okay, but remember, again, they brought in these guys to raise the floor, and this is better than some of the guys, the practice squad level guys that were playing meaningful snap. Pierce or not Pierce, something Strong Jr., whatever Strong, I forget his first name, but Strong, right? The defensive lineman, like he's not even on a roster this year, right? And he started meaningful snaps for us last year, right? So I like it, right? Solid, solid play there. The edge rushers, though, that was a story of the week, right? One of the stories of the week. Dennis Gardeck, 3 sacks, 92 pass rush grade. Solid grades really across the board for the most part, 91.9 overall. Just a great, great game by the Barbarian, right? So you love seeing that. Zaven Collins didn't have as good of a game. His tackling was solid. His run defense grade okay. The coverage grade wasn't as great. So his grade was a little bit down. Pass rush grade wasn't as good, but at least he got a sack and it wasn't taken away from him. But I do want to mention this, and this was, last week I sent out I put out a tweet about Zaven Collins did everything well except rush the passer. And some people comment, well, he had a sack taken back, so I disagree. I'm like, well, here's the thing. Last week he had 0 pressures. Even if he had that 1 sack, what I argued was, even if the sack wasn't taken away because of a penalty, he still had 0 other pressures. And so he's not consistently getting the pressure. And we see it this week. He had 1 sack, but that was the only pressure, and his pass rush grade 57.1. So I love Zaven Collins. I want him to be good. I want to see him develop as a pass rusher. You like that he had a sack. You like that he had 1 last week that could have been except for a penalty. But I want to see more consistent pressure, because here's the thing. Like if you aren't consistent in getting pressures, there's a little bit of a fear that those sacks are outliers. Do you remember Jordan Phillips? You remember Jordan Phillips, a defensive lineman we signed from Buffalo, and who missed a lot of games. And here's the deal about Jordan Phillips. He had a lot of sacks, but it was sort of an outlier because his pressure rate wasn't good. He kind of got lucky, right? And he got home on a lot of those sacks, but his pressure to sack rate was abnormally high. Okay. So if you're not getting your pressures, hurries, and those things, if you're not getting those consistently and you're getting an occasional sack, I'm not saying you're not earning that sack, but it's not as sustainable, because it's like hockey. You need shots on goal. You need lots of shots on goal. And if you keep getting those, you're eventually going to get them. But if you get home on a sack once in a while, but you're not consistently getting pressures, you might have a good stretch, but then you're going to get shut out, right? So I'm just saying, I want him to be good as a pass rusher. He's good in all the other facets. I want him to become that, because that would be a game changer. But that was his only pressure. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. So this is one of those things where the raw stats sometimes kind of don't show everything, right? I mean, Gardeck had 4. He had at least 1 other pressure in addition to that, right? So that you look at that, right? So that's a thing to keep in mind, right? A couple comments real quick. Collins is an edge setter, and absolutely, the role they use him is a little bit of a hybrid, right? So in some ways, Rob Moore saying Dan Patrick considers hurries as valuable sacks. Yeah, I mean, because it puts the. I don't know if I think it's as valuable, but a hurry makes the quarterback make a mistake. And I guess you could argue if it ends up leading to an interception, it's arguably more valuable because it formed a turnover. So maybe it is in the aggregate, right? So yeah. Drew saying, don't make me think of Jordan Phillips. Joe, this was a good night. Right? Yeah. Don't make me think about him. We're celebrating, right? So Collins, so I just kind of wanted to hit on that though. Love Collins, love what he's doing. Still want to see him continue to get better, more consistent as a pass rusher might be a way to think of it, right? Xavier Thomas, had 0 hurries, or 0 pressures. He graded better than last week, played 21 snaps, right? Had his 59.1. He didn't play a lot last week, 18 snaps. It was close to that, but his grade last week was really bad, right? 29.3. And you wonder, well, again, why is that so low? Again, we'll go back to what I talked about. Pass rush is so important that if your pass rush is deficient and you're on defense, those are the 2 most important things. Overall, the way the formula is, it brings it down, right? Because remember, it's not a simple averaging. So he graded better this week, right? So we're all hopeful he can develop into a good pass rusher, right? You know the story. A guy with really highly touted recruit coming out, and then had some issues that kind of took him aside, right? So, he's young, or he's not really young's the wrong word, because he's almost 25. He's an older rookie, but he's still, needs to develop some. But so good to see his grade get better, at least, right? Okwara, had a not a great grade overall, 48.6. His pass rush wasn't great coverage. Good at tackling run defense, right? Overall. And then Dimakaji had a nice grade, a solid game, only 11 snaps, right? He had a pressure, even though he didn't get a sack, right? So that certainly helps there. So graded reasonably well, right? You like seeing, someone playing well. You like seeing another edge who's playing reasonably well, even if it's unlimited snaps, right? Okay. So, boy, I think we got to every position, right? Let's get a couple more comments. Mizaki Felix saying these defenses are going to lose a significant amount of games. I don't know if it's going to lose as many as you might think. They need work, but I talked about this with the guys I jumped down with earlier. And I might have talked about earlier, like the talent is better than it was last year. It's not elite talent, but like last year they were trying to coach up practice squad level talent with a few good players. This year, they've got at least NFL talent that they have to coach up. I think it could be a middle of the pack defense if the coaching does a really good job. The pass rush, yeah, I get it. They went against the Rams, beat up offensive line. So I don't want to get too excited about the pass rush. But I think, yes, some of the games they're going to lose are going to be because the defense can't keep up with the offense. But I think it's going to be better than we all thought. Here's hoping. A couple quick other comments. Drew saying Thomas got mauled versus Buffalo. He had help much better versus LA. Yeah. And then Robert saying, fun fact, Cardinals, the team ranked third in sacks week 2, right? Yeah, there we go. Right. I don't expect them that. I think that's going to regress a little bit to the mean, but it's nice to see that. Real quick, let's look at the Rams grades. We're not going to spend a lot of time, but their offensive grades, weren't great. They didn't have any dark red grades, but Tutu Atwell was the best grades. Couple receivers, the receivers were some of the best grades, really. Blake Corum had a decent grade. But here's what I want to look at. Look at their offensive line. It wasn't horrible, but they were better. So some of them were better at pass blocking, some were better at run blocking, right? But their pass blocking here with their center and their left tackle were really bad. And that certainly speaks to those sacks, right? So they weren't great, right? And we saw that, right? Also, Karen Williams, he was okay grade. 63.2. But his running grade of 60.7, right, wasn't great, which is nice to see, because he is a guy who really kind of beat up in the Cardinals. But Matthew Stafford, 57.2, right? Not a great grade there, right? And real quick, looking at their defense, they had a couple guys that graded okay, but this, you keep in mind, this is one snap. So their best grade, that you have to throw that out as an outlier. Jared Verse had a nice game, right? But he was much more on the run defense, right? That was really where he really did well. Not as well in the pass rush, right? Couple defensive linemen did okay. John Johnson, the safety on 21 snaps, did okay, right? Reader, but then you get to a lot of these ugly grades, right? And Cameron Kitchens, free safety, right? And when you look at the coverage snaps, like sorting by here brings in, I tweeted out about this, right? These are their top coverage snaps, which brings up really their starting, defensive backs plus their linebacker, right? Middle linebacker, Troy Reader. And so these are the guys that are doing most of the coverage. And look at their coverage grades, right? Quentin Lake, strong safety, got torched, right? Cam Curl, 40.0. That's ugly. Reader, decent, right? Coverage grade. That's a linebacker, right? Tre'Davious White, not great, not as bad as some of the other guys. Kobe Durant, 40. This wasn't great, right? And then here's their other linebacker on 52 snaps, got torched, right? Johnson wasn't horrible. This is the thing right here. These coverage grades for the defensive backs. That's a result of our passing game being really good, right? And their tackling was grades. They got some folks who had some really poor tackling grades, including some of their defensive line linebackers, right? So not great grades for them, right? Great for us. So let's see what I always like to kind of wrap up on. Let's look at the team grades. For last week, it didn't look bad, especially the offensive line. But man, seeing more green, like McBride's grades are getting up because of that good game. Harrison Jr. last week, his grade wasn't great, so this didn't look as good. But now you're seeing this, like, look at that offensive line, like no dark orange, right? No red. Like, this is nice. This is so nice to see, right? This greens and some, Fro's grade 59.1 is the lowest. If that's the lowest grade you have on your starting offensive line, I'll take that, right? I want to see it continue to get better, but that just feels nice, right? There's no glaring weak spot there. Murray's great. Oh my goodness, right? But you see Connor's great. Like, there's just a lot more green here than we're used to seeing, right? Wilson great. Hopefully it'll go up more from there, but this just feels so much nicer than what we see. If you've looked at these grades in the past, like, there were a lot more orange spots, right? The defense, though, also, like, there's a couple, like White hasn't graded real well, right? Thompson's grade isn't great, right? Okay, but like, even this defense, there's more greens and yellow. And let's bring it up to the nickel, right? To bring in, Thomas, not great, but like, Williams, like, listen, this isn't a great defense, but this is less glaring than what we've seen last year. I mean, there were not nearly as many green or yellows, and there were a lot more oranges. There's some areas we want to see improvement on, but it's like, and I want to kind of wrap up on this. Like, one of the things I've talked about in here, I've tweeted about this, I've talked about this in the Discord. The textbook NFL rebuild is a 3-year process. Year one, turning a lot of roster turnover, trying to bring in young players. Players are buying into the system, but the talent just is either not enough talent, or the talent that there is still young, a lot of it. So it's just, you're scrappy, but you're not winning a lot of games. Year two is where you're supposed to see improvements. Those young players get a little more developed. You bring in a few more free agents. You bring in more draft talent, but it's still a little bit young. And you're supposed to, year two, you in a textbook rebuild, you're supposed to be, frisky, right? And maybe at the end of the season, kind of pushing for a wild card, but maybe you don't make it, right? And this textbook rebuild is what the Lions did. Like, they're the archetype for this, right? And then year three is where you're supposed to be a playoff contender, right? And that's been my mindset of, like, my expectations for the Cardinals. Is year one, we saw last year, they played hard, and they weren't an easy out, but they just didn't have the talent to hang. And this year, going in, my expectations were, well, maybe they'll push for a wild card spot, but they'll probably be closer to 500, but they'll give us a lot to be optimistic about. It's only 2 games in. They have to continue it. But those 2 games, hanging tough with the Bills, who might be one of the best teams in the league, probably are, right? And then blowing out the Rams. Yes, the Rams are beat up, but that's what you're supposed to do to teams that aren't good. I feel like this team might be ahead of schedule from even what I thought. And if you watch my stuff enough, that I'm more optimistic than a lot of people, right? And some people even criticize me for that. That's fine. Someone has to talk us off the ledge on those bad weeks, right? But I just feel like, man, we might be ahead of the schedule. The team might be ahead of schedule, right? I feel, and I tweeted about this. If this defense can even be around the middle of the pack, this is a playoff team, right? So I think, man, I'm excited. Drew McWhorter, like, this is what people are saying about Kyler. I got to play this dude twice a year, right? So, yeah. So, all right. That's kind of everything. I know we went a little longer than usual. I went on a few tangents about Kyler Murray and PFF grading. But I think that, again, maybe some things I had to get off my chest, right? And yeah, we got some players coming back. Zay Jones, Darius Williams returning. I think Darius Williams is the bigger thing, right? Zay Jones is a nice veteran depth piece, but this offense, I think, is going to be fine with or without him. Darius Robinson could really help that defense, right? So, yes. All right. Well, thank you all for hanging out with us. I know we had a nice group of folks, watching, which is nice. Like, and Appreciate you all being active in the chat. This is an exciting week. It's a lot more fun to have this conversation after a win, and especially after a win like this. So here's hoping, we get to have another fun one next week. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you, Brett. Yeah, I appreciate this. The PF. I'm glad you enjoyed that. I'm glad that was helpful. So I'm gonna put up my channel member kind of shout outs, and we're gonna get out of here. We'll see you next time. Have a good night. Peace.